Glad you're here this morning. Another beautiful Lord's Day to gather together to worship as family, as children of the living God. Go ahead and turn your Bibles this morning to the book of Esther in the Old Testament, one of the books that probably contains the last bit of the chronological history of God's chosen people. A nifty little story here that makes a really powerful application that I believe is relevant to what we are doing today and honoring our graduates, what we are doing tonight and having a service that is focused on unity of all believers, tearing down some barriers. So one little note, here's something new. I want to welcome our family at Central Valley this morning, those meeting in 316 and those joining us live on Facebook. If you're here this morning in the auditorium, this TV monitor is primarily for them. So you still look at the walls up here, but this is going to make for a better presentation that's going out over the live stream for the guests joining us who are not physically present with us this morning. So the book of Esther, we're just going to jump right in, chapter 1 and verse 1. It's a timeline. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. So like I said, the book of Esther is written in this time frame after the Babylonian captivity during the time of the Persian Empire. Now, over the course of history, there have been empires come and empires go. So you had the Egyptians, you had the Assyrians, you had the Babylonians, and now the Persians are the big dogs. And every time there is a transition, the kingdom grows. So this is a rough estimation of the map, 127 provinces. And he says from India, which you see all the way to the far right there, and all the way down to Cush, which is Ethiopia here on this side of the map. And with every succeeding empire, I think they get a little more maybe brutal along the way as well. But nonetheless, this empire has been pretty good to God's chosen people. The king is a fella named Xerxes. Xerxes the Great. If you have an older translation, a King James Version, and several others, the word there is Ahasuerus, which is Xerxes the Great. That's how the world remembers him. And he ruled the Persian Empire from 486 to 465 BC. And it is during his reign that this story takes place. We'll read a few more verses. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. In the third year of the reign, he gave himself a banquet. So just as a point of reference, Susa is still here right on the edge of Babylonia, because they already had a pretty significant capital city essentially built there. But what he does in the third year of his reign is he has a party. I mean, we're talking about a royal celebration, letting the world know this is exactly how wealthy we are. He invited in people from all over the world, and this thing went on for 180 days. For 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom, the splendor of his glory and majesty. And then when that was over, he gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for everyone who was in the citadel of Susa. Now, it's kind of speculation on my part, but one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, a phenomenal display of architecture and horticulture, apparently. They say nobody really knows exactly where it was, but when I read of Babylon, when I read of this time frame, shortly after the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, who was said responsible for building the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, I cannot help but think that King Xerxes has called in all of these people to come and check out this ancient wonder of the world. It was apparently splendid. So they have 180 days of kind of an open season. Come check out and see how wealthy we are. Come check out our military. Come and see how good we are. And then this 7-day party is essentially located around this garden, the king's palace. And it's a free-for-all. It is pretty much a free-for-all. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry marble. porphyry, marble, mother of pearl and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from another, and the royal wine was abundant in keeping with the king's liberality. 7 days, open bar, drink all you want. By the king's command, there were no restrictions on how much you could drink. While this party is going on, the queen, her name is Vashti, she is having probably a little more sedate party for the ladies, maybe a tea. We'll call hers a tea. And after this 180 days of extravagance and opulence, after 7 days of getting everybody drunk, the king has one more thing he wants to show the people. So if you're a man, and you're a man of power, once you show everybody in the world how strong you are, once you show everybody in the world how much power you have, once you show everybody in the world how much money you have, the last thing you've got to open is, look how hot my wife is. So that, I believe, is what the king does at this point. It says that he is somewhat intoxicated. He is in good spirits. And he commands that the queen come before him. Again, essentially just to show her off. Now, the queen does something that nobody in the world would believe. She said no. She just simply said no. I'm not going over there to show off my physical body, my beauty. Well, you don't tell the king, the most powerful empire in the world, no. The king was furious. What do I do? So he called his advisors together and said, what do we do with this lady? And that's what we got to fire her. You got to fire her right now, put her away, and sign a decree that she can never, ever again come before your presence. And so that's exactly what the king did. Queen Vashti is fired for standing up for morality. I mean, she has really done the right thing. Women are not to be viewed as objects, as sex objects, as things to ogle, as things to be controlled by men. She made this point very early on. But the king is saying, if women in the country find out she's done this, well, they're going to do the same things. We can't have all these women standing up to their husbands and saying no. So that comes to the end of chapter 1. Now, chapter 2, some time passes. The Bible doesn't say how long. His fury had subsided, and the king, I guess, gets a little bit lonely. He begins to miss the old girl. You know, she met some needs of his. She was physically attractive. So he says, I need a replacement. So all of his wise advisors, they come together and say, what we need to do is we're going to have a beauty pageant. You've got 127 provinces that go from India to Kush. We're going to have a beauty pageant, and we're going to bring in all of the most beautiful virgins from the entire kingdom, and we're going to give them a special period or cycle of beauty treatments. You will spend an evening with them, kind of like the bachelor or bachelorette. And at the end of the day, you will pick one of these young ladies to be your new queen, to be your new wife. And this is where we're introduced to the main character of the story. Verse 5 of chapter 2. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish. He had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken with Jehoiachin, king of Judah. Mordecai also had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. The young woman who was also known as Esther. She had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother had died. So this is an interesting segue now into the main part of the story. We have Jews who are still living in the Persian Empire, voluntarily so, because before the Persian Empire was the Babylonian Empire, and the Babylonian Empire was ruled over by King Nebuchadnezzar. And if you remember your biblical history, they took the children of Israel into captivity. It happened over the course of 3 military conflicts beginning in 605 BC, 597 BC, and then in 586 BC, they finally completely and utterly destroyed Jerusalem, tore down the walls of the temple and all of that stuff. But they hauled off a good number of the Israelites, the children of Israel, Jews, And they took them all the way from Jerusalem. And you can't go across the Arabian desert because that's about 500 miles of desert. They take them all the way to Babylon, where they are in what we know as Babylonian captivity for a period of about 70 years until 539 BC, when King Cyrus the Persian, they overthrow the Babylonian Empire, and King Cyrus issues an edict that all of the Jews who would like to go back to Jerusalem can go back. So Zerubbabel led the first journey that goes back to Jerusalem. And he took about 50,000 folks with him, but many chose to remain. I mean, they'd been there 70 years, they had jobs, they had homes, and things were decent for them. They were being treated a little bit better under the Persian Empire. So they had decided to stay, and one of them was Mordecai. And his cousin, his niece, his family member, whom he raised as his own child, Esther. So when the call for beautiful young ladies goes out to enter into the Miss Persia Empire pageant, he says, I'm going to take her. So he took her to the palace, where she immediately found favor with the people. There were some folks within the palace whose job was to take care of these ladies who were in training to be in the harem. They were given special treatments. They were given special diets. They were given special clothing. And she was just received with honor very early on. But she didn't tell them who she was. She didn't tell them her nationality or ethnicity. She just did her thing. Now, it's interesting to find that this series of beauty treatments goes on for 12 months. I don't know what you can do in 12 months, but the Bible says that for 6 months they were treated with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. So you take some already beautiful ladies and give them 12 months. I mean, you can do a whole lot in 12 months. So they had them fixed up nice. And then it would be their turn to go and see the king for an evening. And they were allowed to take with them whatever their handlers would suggest. So when Esther's turn came, she went for an evening with the king. The king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women. She won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins, so he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So the story's moving along pretty quickly now. And just so happens at the end of chapter 2, there's almost like a little addendum here, a little story that you have to keep in mind that plays a role here. So Mordecai is still sitting at the king's gate. I guess he hangs out there with the guys whittling, trading pocket knives or something all day long. But what he finds out here is he's attentive, and he hears two of the king's bodyguards discussing a plot to kill the king. So he calls Esther and says, Esther, there's a plot afoot to assassinate the king. Esther goes to the king and says, you're about to be assassinated. They did a full study, workup, got CSI involved, and turns out they were right. These two guys were planning to kill the king. Mordecai was given credit. But the only credit that he's given is that it was recorded in the annals of the king, his journal. Somebody made an entry, oh, by the way, on this date, Mordecai saved the king's life. It was written down. Well, chapter 3 now, we're introduced to the villain. I mean, this is a really great story. It's really powerful stuff. It's got intrigue, it's got murder, it's got everything. It's good. So there's a fellow now that works for the king, and his name is Haman. Haman is an Agagite. An Agagite is a descendant of the Amalekites. So the Amalekites and the Israelites have some history. When the children of Israel coming out of Egyptian bondage, the first people that they fight with are the Amalekites. And the Amalekites attack them from behind. They do some of that dirty stuff. So God has declared them kind of their mortal enemies and said don't have anything to do with them. And matter of fact, on one point, to wipe them out. So here's a guy that's working for the king who happens to be an Agagite and Amalekite. And he is the villain of the story. The king promotes him to second in command. And he commands all of the people in the kingdom, you pay this guy his due respect. You are to bow down to him, but Mordecai would not kneel down and would not pay him honor. The royal officials were like, what is up with you, dude? I mean, this is going to cost you your life. Why won't you just bow down to the guy? It's the rules. It's the law of the land. But he refused to do it. And it is noted there at the end of verse 4 that Mordecai was a Jew, which brings into this situation a little bit of racism, or a whole lot of racism, if you will. When Haman saw that Mordecai, this is chapter 3 and verse 5, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. But his problem was he wasn't just enraged at Mordecai, he was enraged at everyone of Jewish descent. So that's where the racism thing comes in. One man was hurting his feelings. One man was living in rebellion. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the entire kingdom of Xerxes. So Haman goes to the king. First of all, he cast lots. He cast pur, or pure, P-U-R. He rolls the dice and says, I'm going to choose a date to kill every Jew living in this kingdom. And the date was chosen. It was about a year out. And he goes to the king and he says, oh, king, there's some people living amongst your people. And they're not like everybody else. They don't keep the laws. They don't keep our customs. They separate themselves. And it's really in the best interest for you not to allow them to live here. And I tell you what I would like to do. I'd like to kill them all. And I will give you 10,000 talents of silver for the privilege of killing all of these Jews. Well, the king, he doesn't really probably understand the full magnitude of what he says, but he says, you know what? This one's on me. You don't owe me a dime. Go kill them all, and we'll sign the decree. And at this time, the rule of the Babylonians and the Persians was once a rule has been signed, once a law has been enacted by the king, stamped with his signet ring, it is irreversible. It is unchangeable, unalterable. So that's the deal that was struck there in chapter 3, that on a certain day, about a year from now, everybody's going to rise up on one day and kill every Jewish person living in the kingdom of Persia. The letters went out. They were disseminated far and wide. Which brings us to chapter 4. In chapter 4, Mordecai learns what's going on. So he tore his clothes. He sits at the king's gate in sackcloth and ashes. And he wept loudly and bitterly, and he wailed, because he knew the consequences of what was about to happen. Well, the people that saw Mordecai acting like this and knew that he was somehow related to Esther went and told Esther, hey, there's something bad wrong with Mordecai. He is unconsolable. He is wailing, and it's just a mess. So one of Esther's people went down to Mordecai and says, hey, what's the deal? So Mordecai tells him, well, you know, there's an edict that's gone out that all of my people will be killed on one day. Here's a copy of the letter. So this messenger of Esther, she takes it back to Esther and shows it to her. And Esther says, okay, but what do I do? I see the problem, but I don't really understand what it is that I can do to fix this. So the messenger went back out and told Mordecai, what do you suggest, Mordecai? What do you think we should do? Well, obviously the solution is for the queen, Esther, to go in and talk to the king and say, let's not do this. But the problem is, another one of those laws of the Persians is, you don't just go into the king's house. Even if you're his wife, even if you're the queen, you don't go to the king's house until he invites you. And Esther said, it's been 30 days since I've been called over there. So I don't think I'm in a position to go in there. Odds are I'm going to be killed. And that's what brings us to really your take home for the day. Esther was the right person at the right place at the right time to save her people. She has got the inside track, even though at this point she doesn't see it. And she's still a little bit fearful of this idea because she could lose her life and then she dies and everybody dies. It doesn't matter. And that's when these famous words were reported back to Mordecai. He sent back this answer. He said, Esther, don't think that because you're living in the king's house, that you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. He said, you are in the right place at the right time to do the right thing. But even if you're silent, God's going to take care of his people. But I love the last part of this. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for just this moment in history. Who knows, but maybe this was the one thing that you were born to accomplish. It is your time to do the right thing. Well, those words resonated with Esther, and she says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Y'all fast. Get all the Jews together that live in the capital city of Susa here, and for 3 days we're going to fast, and we are going to prepare for this. I'm going to go to the king. I'm going to ask him about this law, and if I perish, I perish. I'm going to do what God has called me to do, even if it costs me my very life. So on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes. She fixed up her hair, got all prettied up. And she went and stood out wherever they stand in the hall of the king's palace or whatever. And she just presented herself. And the king, as you might expect, he finds favor with Esther and invites her into a meeting. She touches the golden scepter, and he asks her this question. What is it, Queen Esther? What can I do for you? What can I give you? Up to half of the kingdom, and it will be given to you. And she said, you know what, King? Really the only thing I want right now is I would like for you and Haman to come to a banquet at my house this afternoon. Sounds like a pretty good deal. A little change there in verse 9 now of chapter 5. Now Haman went out that day. He was in high spirits. He was on top of the world. He's a man that's filled with pride, and he's a man that's filled with hatred for a certain people. And when he saw Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, he observed that he neither rose nor showed fear. He didn't pay the proper respect, and he was filled with rage against Mordecai. And he wanted to kill him right now. But he restrained himself and says, well, I've got a better plan. I'm going to kill them all. So he was able to go home. So he goes home and he calls his wife and he calls his friends, and they all come together. And he says, y'all won't believe I'm on a roll. I have been promoted to second in command of the entire Persian Empire. Everybody loves me. I'm wealthy beyond measure. I've got my own signet ring. I got this fancy new robe that I can wear. And, oh, by the way, I get to go to the queen's house today. The queen is having a banquet. 2 people are invited, me and the king. He said, that is phenomenal. But look at verse 13 of chapter 5. But all of this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Mordecai sitting at the gate. He's got everything in the world going for him. One guy that aggravates him, and that's where he focuses his energy, his attention, and his emotions. His wife said, I'll tell you what you do. And there's a little bit of a translation variance here, and either one's fine with me. But she says, have a pole set up reaching the height of 50 cubits and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Your translation may say to have a gallows built 50 cubits high and have him hanged on it in the morning. Either way, the point is it's an instrument of death, an instrument of humiliation, whether it's an impalement or a hanging. So Haman said, you know, that's a great idea. So he immediately had this pole 50 cubits tall, 75 feet tall set up. Chapter 6 is what I call irony. The very definition of biblical irony is so hilarious. So that night, the king, for some reason, he can't sleep. And he says, why don't somebody bring me one of those history books about my reign? And they brought it in. They began to read to him from the history. And he comes across this part where a few years earlier, this guy named Mordecai had saved his life. He had uncovered a plot to have him assassinated, and he says, was this guy ever rewarded? Did we ever do anything nice for this guy for saving my life? And at the very same moment, in comes Haman. Haman has come in the middle of the night to ask special permission to go ahead and impale or hang Mordecai in the morning. So before Haman can get his question out about hanging Mordecai, the king says, hey, Haman, come here, man, I got a question for you. What would you do to honor someone in this kingdom? What should be done to honor the person that I really want to honor? So Haman's there's nobody in this kingdom that the king really wants to honor more than me. So here he said, King, you know what I would do? For the man that you would like to honor, I would get him one of your robes, one of those really nice purple robes, one that you've worn. And I would get one of your best horses, your favorites. And I would put the royal crest of Persia right on the head of this horse. And I would put this gentleman on this horse with this robe on. And I would have one of your most valuable princes lead this guy through the city. And you will draw attention to him and you'll say, this is the guy the king really wants to honor. The king thought about that and he says, you know what, Haman, that is a great idea. So what you do is you go get Mordecai the Jew, and you take this robe, and you go get this horse, and I want you to lead him through the city tomorrow, and I want you to proclaim as loud as you can, this is the guy the king wants to honor. Haman was beside himself, but he did it. And he came home, and he was just absolutely mortified. Now, his wife finally understands the story. At the end of chapter 6, his wife says, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, since he is one of God's people, you cannot stand against him. You're going to lose this battle, Haman, so you might as well accept that. So now it's time for the second banquet. The first banquet, the only thing that Esther says was, I want you to come back for another banquet. So chapter 7 now is the day for the big banquet. Mordecai, Haman, despite his humiliation and the king, they go to Esther's house for a party. And while they're gathered around the table, the king says once again, okay, Esther, what is it that I can do for you? What can I give you up to half the kingdom? And Esther says, you know what, king? There's a people, me and my people. We've been sold. We've been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Now, if we were simply going to be sold into slavery, I wouldn't waste your time with this. But you need us. And I think, there's something we ought to do about this. Well, the king said, well, who in the world had that stupid idea? And she said, well, matter of fact, it's that fella right there. It's Haman. Haman is the one who has decreed murder and annihilation for my people. Well, the king was furious. He stormed out of the room. He went out to the garden to cool off. Haman, I guess, in some ploy to beg mercy, falls across Esther's lap. The king walks back in and says, you got to be kidding me. You're going to fall on her lap right here in front of me? And somebody there just happened to say, you know what, king? Over there by Haman's house is a pole 75 feet tall. Why don't you take Haman and hang him on it right now? King said, you know what, that's a great idea. So they impaled Haman on the own pole that he had built to hang Mordecai. And that's the rest of the story. Haman is impaled. Mordecai is promoted. Mordecai the Jew is now given Haman's signet ring. He is promoted to second in all of the kingdom of Persia. But the story here is Esther saves her people. Esther was in the right place at the right time to do the right thing to save her people from annihilation. And while that is significant in and of itself, if you remember the history of God's chosen people, what makes this the most significant is we have to preserve a lineage of Messiah. Jesus has to come into the world from the tribe of Judah, from the lineage of David, through God's chosen people. And if all of the Jews are annihilated, and let's call it 480 BC or 475 BC, then we lose the lineage of Messiah. That's the irony, that's the power, that's the beauty of the story. That God chose a young Jewish girl who was an orphan girl, who was living with her cousin / adopted father, to go into a place in the most powerful kingdom in the world and save her people. But the story doesn't end there. Because here's the bottom line. God has a plan for all of us. God has a plan for all of us. A plan, a purpose, and a place. You ever wonder why you live where you live, or work where you work, or interact with the people that you interact with, or you run into these people and you say, well, that was a strange coincidence. And I say, no, it wasn't that strange, really. It was God working to put you where He needed you at the right time, with the right skill set, with the right experience, with the right platform, with the right leverage to make a difference for His greater purposes. So you say, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And maybe we are in this kingdom at this time for something special. And again, I think something special that we are working towards is unity of all believers. I think that is our special place in God's kingdom. For those who are graduating within the next month, we have some graduated yesterday. We have folks graduating high school, folks graduating college. They're going away to other places. They're going away to other schools. And I say, when you leave out of here, why am I here? For such a time as this, you are called to make a difference, to do something big where God places you. You have a responsibility to be faithful to God's plan, to God's purpose, and God's place in your life. To be the messenger, to be the spokesman, to be the one who speaks up on behalf of His people. And I want you to be thinking about who it is that God has placed you in contact with. Who is it and why is it that God has placed you? There's somebody in your life, in your circle of influence, in your sphere of friends, in your community. They're your responsibility. God hand-selected you for that mission, for that purpose. And just like Mordecai told Esther, he said, you know, you may think you're safe. You may think you don't have to do anything, that you're going to be okay, but really, God will take care of it, but He really wants you to do it. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? I'm going to toss to Jason at Central Valley now and wind this thing